This is intended to supplement your textbook on 17th century Dutch art. Some basic information here. 1609 marks the birth of the Dutch Republic. It's this little plot of land in Europe, and again there's France and Italy and Spain. This very little plot of land across from England. Um, Synonyms for this little plot of land is the Netherlands, sometimes called the Dutch Republic, or the United Provinces, because in 1609, 13 small provinces, actually you can't see the divisions of those 13, united together to form, again, this Netherlands. They were Calvinist in religious belief, and therefore, and also very wealthy, as we'll find out. And because of that, they went to war with their neighbors who quite wanted them. Spain owned this little plot of land in red there. France was obviously nearby. So in the wars of the religion, Protestant versus Catholic, the Netherlands was again, representing the Protestant, a very small bit of land there that these countries coveted. But the wars were settled in 1648, and after that time, the Netherlands really flourishes. But anyway, the 17th century marks a period of wonderful art for the Netherlands. How are they different from the rest of Europe? They are Republican. Again, they tend not to have an aristocracy, or they have a very little body, little numbers of aristocracy, but in the main, they run their governance by vote, by elected officials. They're Calvinist in religion. There are actually lots of little religions there, including the Jews. They tend to tolerate other religions, although the Calvinist is a particularly strict Protestant religion. And so they did not like images in their churches. And so what I'm showing you here is a picture, painting done at the time, of an interior of a church, which they stripped bare of images, in some ways to distinguish themselves from the Catholics, who clearly loved images, as you have seen. Again, a capitalist economy. You saw where they were located. They could trade very easily. They established these really quite remarkable trading companies, shipping companies, but they also had a flourishing economy through manufacturing, bringing in raw goods and then manufacturing them into other things that they could then sell. The economy went up and down, and so that bankruptcies were often common. So a little unstable and wealthy, no doubt wealthy, but a little unstable in their economy. How is the art market different? Again, no big patrons, so nothing like a church or state really. No, no king to, hire up a palace. Lots of middle class though, and again, wealthy or even sort of the lower middle class, buying art, buying it for their houses. So the art will change. So you don't have these big forms of art like, Bernini's Saint Teresa in Ecstasy, but you have small paintings. Um, and usually not sculpture. That's more pricey to produce and to buy. They also have prints. We won't talk about prints in this class, but prints are, um, they're multiple, so you can make multiple copies of a image, and a cheap way of having art in your house. Um, Subjects, we don't see a lot of religious painting or even like mythology, um, history painting, but you do see these types of paintings. Portraits, tons of portraits. I don't think I have any in this PowerPoint, but you can see it elsewhere. Still lives, we'll take a look at them. Landscapes, and then lastly, genre scenes. Before I leave genre scenes, let me just, before I leave the text here, let me just say, genre scenes are really scenes, paintings of people doing everyday things. So not highfalutin, you know, Apollo chasing Daphne, nothing that is written down in a famous story, but just, people doing everyday things, peasants doing things, women doing things, Now, there's a lot of social anxiety about these groups: poor people, women, aliens, that is to say, immigrants, people who weren't Calvinist, for example. And so these get included in genre paintings as well. They're not the only kinds of genre paintings, but those are the kinds we're going to look at. How do we interpret these images? Art historians really love to fight with each other about how to interpret, but there are two major ways, as you're going to see. One is to look at they're so descriptive, these paintings. They're just, lots of little detail in these very tiny paintings. And people like to think that these are mirrors of 17th century Netherlands, either the world as it was, rather, I have world as it is here, but world as it was back then, or world as it should have been. Aspirationally, this is what the 17th century Netherlands should look like. This is how people should act. Or alternatively, art historians want to like look deeper and look for deeper moral messages. And I won't do a lot with the emblem tradition here in this. That's usually an upper level kind of investigation, but iconography we'll talk about just briefly. So let's begin with one still life. This is a flower painting by actually a woman painter. Again, they tend to get into the market too. Not a lot of women, but there are some. And as you can see, it is just a vase full. I'm sorry, my framing isn't great here, but a vase full of flowers, little cricket there on a tabletop. Again, two ways to unpack the meaning here. We can look to social history, economic history, and say, oh my goodness, we're looking at flowers. This is a rose, an iris. This is a wonderful kind of tulip that was, imported from Turkey, but grown in the Netherlands, and it's a particular kind of exotic striped tulip. So we can look at this and if we were knowledgeable about 17th century economy, we would say, oh my gosh, look at all the wealth or effort it took to assemble these different kinds of flowers, and isn't that something we should be proud of? So we could do that. Alternatively, we could look a little deeper into cultural history and know that certain flowers have cultural meaning. You know that already. Red roses mean passionate love. Irises, for example, mean sorrow. The tulips actually come to mean instability, like fortunes gained and fortunes lost, because a lot of people speculated or bet on the flower market, the tulip market specifically. And so if you think about all those kind of attributes or abstract qualities together, then you can kind of create a meaning for this painting. Or you could just generally look at these flowers and again, I'm still hearing cultural history and say, well, some of them are past, that is to say they're dying. That one looks like it's a little flappy. And some of them not. They're things of beauty, but they don't have long lives. So we can put that together and say, well, the meaning must be, human beings don't attach too much to beauty, because it is something that passes. And that cricket, who's quick to jump, also reiterate, sort of strengthens that meaning. Such a painting like this then would be called a vanitas, because it reminds people of the vanity of holding on to life. So I don't think I gave you a definition for still life, but still life, I'm going to move this down now. Still life is just a painting of inanimate objects, objects that are not alive. And so they can include not just flower paintings, but sort of these tables of meals half eaten. And we could go through that same sort of using the two methods of meaning to figure out what this painting, what the artist here intended it to mean. Lemons obviously are imported. A dish like that is imported from the East. Here is a little timepiece you know, a half-drunk glass of wine, half-eaten thing of bread. Again, put all these together, and I suspect even without too much more equipment than that, you could figure out a meaning for this painting. One can perform the same kind of operation on landscapes and seascapes, very common in the 17th century Netherlands. Here's an artist, his painting. It is of the wheat fields. Wheat fields here obviously indicate, you know, typical of the Netherlands, so, you know, something you might see. Typical of man's industry. Through it is a very broken path, you know, lots of obstacles here in the way, on which there is a family that is split. Now, a man here and a woman and child there. Now, that is an interesting thing to think about in the Netherlands that, again, has, and I'm showing you now here, the distant ships, has as one of their major industries, shipping, where men go off and leave the women behind to take care of things. So split families is something every 17th century Dutch person would understand, and the hard pathway that sets up. There are other things in the painting that suggest, again, meaning. The clouds that are, some are dark, some are light. They seem to be on the move, which is a very Baroque thing, but a changeable sky, but also suggest, you know, that fortunes change quickly. They move ships, they don't move ships, they move people closer together, therefore, and keep them far apart. Maybe sometimes even permanently if those skies bring storms. So genre scenes, I just thought I'd show you very quickly 2 genre scenes. And again, just everyday subjects. And this one's kind of a funny one, I guess. Again, an anxiety about people who weren't wealthy, i.e. the poor, the peasants. So, you know, some kind of social commentary on them. Although not all the commentary was negative. So the peasant paintings are the most interesting because the tone of those paintings is something that you know, that people want to unpack. I next want to look at a subset of genre painting of women, and I'm going to stop this video here and do a separate video on them.